Hey there, welcome to another episode of Cartridges and Casings, a whiplash of a military history live stream. Today's guest is Andrew Dixon. Andrew Dixon is currently the commander of the Lincoln County Militia, as well as a gunstocker, and he has been in the living history community for the last 10 years. Today's video is going to be going over flintlocks and all the different variations that are used during the American Revolutionary War. From rampart guns to wall guns to fusils to officer fusils to fowling pieces to military muskets. This video is to serve as an introduction if you've ever wondered why there's so much variation. So let's get started there. Andrew, welcome to the show. And before we start, do you want to say anything?
I think you kind of covered the basics of it. Like you said there, Lincoln County Militia. I'm the captain there, so feel free to reach out to us on Facebook if anybody's looking and interested in the North South Carolina area, Virginia, in joining a good quality militia unit. We try to stay fairly active, and so that's kind of my shameless plug for the unit there.
Well, we're all about shameless plugs to bring more people into the hobby. Let's kick it off. Do you want to talk about the wood first, or do you want to talk about the piece that we are currently looking at?
So, we looking at our outline here. Sorry, you'll see me look over to the right a little bit. That's I've got a double monitor set up here. The first thing we kind of had to look at here was the wood of like maple and other woods versus walnut, and then how they're used in military muskets versus the civilian piece. So, poking around, part of the big thing with walnut is number one, it's a hardwood, of course. It's very dense. It doesn't splinter out really bad, and it's very common. So in Europe, you have European walnut. You get into some parts, you have, I believe it's Turkish walnut. And then you come over into the New World, and especially, I don't really know about the Northeast, but especially here in the South, there's black walnut trees everywhere. So it's a fairly available material, and we actually have like invoices of black walnut being sent back over to the Holy Roman Empire into the UK to be used for particularly gun stocks.
And
Um, what'd you
I
say?
was gonna say that's what we're looking at right here. Is I got this picture off of Wikipedia. This is a black walnut, so to know that we're talking about. And
Yeah, and black walnut's a great tree for a bunch of different things. Of course, the wood's absolutely beautiful. You can get some pieces that are like a really dark chocolate brown, makes phenomenal stocks, makes phenomenal wooden tools and bowls, everything like that. And then also the walnuts themselves are very useful for things like dye and for food. But
oh,
some of the other things you see, go ahead.
I was gonna go ahead.
And then civilian guns, you see a lot more of a variation. You'll see maple of different kinds, sugar maple and red maple coming to the top of my coming to mind right now. And this is, of course, this looks like a maple stock gun here. You can kind of see those tiger stripe lines in it. So if you ever hear anybody talking about curly maple, that's what they're talking about. Is those tiger stripe like patterns in it. Um, some of the other cool ones you see persimmon here in the New World, and you see in Germany or the Holy Roman Empire guns stocked in fruit wood, so like apple and pear. And then also here as well, you see a lot of guns stocked in cherry. And I say a lot as a relative term. As far as civilian guns go here in the New World, maple is the most common by far, and then after that is walnut, and then after that you start getting into the fruit woods. But now if you go over to Germany and start looking at some of their Jaegers, you see a lot of walnut. You don't see a lot of maple, but you do see a lot of those apple and pear fruit woods and cherry, which is they're really cool pieces when they get done. There's kind of a simple elegance, I think, to cherry. It has a very reddish tint to it, which is nice.
So
And
why not oak? Why not pine? Why not? Do we see any examples of different types of hardwoods?
so oak is extremely dense. It's very heavy. Trying to stock a gun in oak, if I remember right, it was done. Actually, yeah, I have a buddy of mine that has an oak stocked flintlock. It's an original piece. It's a little after our era. It's like 1785, I think. 1785 to 1790, and It's actually stocked in oak, and it's a very if to be a very small piece, it's very dense. As far as pine goes, I won't say never because I do know of at least one piece that looks like somebody took some parts of a Dutch musket carbine and used a white pine stock and then painted it red. And actually, a acquaintance of mine up in New England has at least has pictures, if not the actual piece itself. But the reason you don't want to use pine or poplar or things like that is they'll splinter out very easily. Um, pine itself's not a hardwood. Other things you'd see are things like beech and birch. Those are very cheap woods. I mean, as far as hardwoods goes, and a lot of the guns you see being made out of those are some of your like your trade guns. These guns that are coming over and they're getting painted. Which I mean, don't get me wrong, it looks kind of cool, but it's at the end of the day, it's not going to be as nice as a gun made from maple or walnut or these fruit woods. And
Oh,
oh, go ahead.
no, keep going.
I was gonna say, and it's not as uniform as the walnuts you're gonna see for a lot of these military guns that doesn't that so they don't splinter out, and there's a common theme there, so the parts are fairly replaceable, and really when you're starting to get into that first era of interchangeable parts.
All right, so we've knocked out the different variants in wood, and now let's start by talking about our first collection of flintlocks, and that's going to be the military flintlock. So I'm going to throw up our Longland, a very rare one, and yeah, if you just want to walk us through this, what stands out to you, what makes it a Longland, what makes it unique.
All right, let me know. I'll see when you get it up there.
No, no, is it not showing for you?
No, I'm still seeing. I think it's that American built gun. It looks very French.
It is very French. How about, is this Fowling piece showing up?
No, I'm not seeing anything right now. You French and your barrel bands is all I see.
Oh, that's going to be making it. Uh, you talk, and I'll see if I can get this picture to pop up.
All right. And so, first guns to talk about, of course, are going to be our military guns, like we said there. Biggest things with military guns is they need to be uniform, of course. Um, so the British start to have a pattern system where they're matter of fact they're still the pattern room, which is part of the Royal Armories now. So you create a piece there as a pattern and you send the stock off to stock makers so they're making the stocks all to the similar measurements, and you have a lot of water power there to make barrels. So you have all these barrels that are going to be the same outside diameter. They're going to be 75 to 78 caliber ish. They're going to be close. The locks are going to be, and it's not going to be true interchangeable parts, but it's going to be minimal fitting, I guess. It's not, you're not going to have to rebuild every gun every time. And the French are doing the same thing, and so some of their design differences, of course, the French are using barrel bands by this time as opposed to pins. They make it a lot easier to disassemble the gun, but there's also more work that goes into making the band itself as opposed to drilling a hole through it and then putting a pin through a barrel lug under it. Um, some of the other important features of a military gun. Number one, the the front of the stock is going to be cut back so it can accept a bayonet. So and there are some militia use guns and one rifle I'm thinking of that were fitted with bayonets as an expedient measure. There's that Longland. Um, so for the British guns, people keep wanting to say, "Oh, it's not it's not a front sight. It's not a front sight." You start looking at any breakdown from the 18th century, that is a sight. It also serves the dual purpose of being the bayonet lug. And so that's going to be what the fields are taken with that day in that day and age, as opposed to, here in militia service where it's primarily going to be used as a hunting piece. The other thing, and especially if you pick the two up, if you pick up like a civilian fowling piece or a civilian rifle compared to a military piece, the military piece is going to feel a lot thicker. It's going to be a lot heavier built. The metal's going to be heavier, and part of that is you're handing it to people who are not they're not your Oxford and Cambridge alumni. They are people who are, lower class usually. So, and you're giving them to people who are rougher on equipment, and they also have to survive, decades of campaigning in the fields, and to be used in their intended role to mount the bayonet charge, or if need be, to deliver the good news with the butt. And even then, I mean, you can see the one up here on screen right now. It actually looks like it has a stock repair at the wrist, which is the most common repair I've seen on original guns right there, because that's the thinnest part. There's very little metal there. There's just the end of the trigger guard, and there's nothing running through right there. So I mean, if you hit it off of a tree or hit something with it too hard over a long period of time, it'll eventually crack and break right there. And so what people would do, there's a couple of different ways to fix it, but the one I've seen most is where it's broken. You drill a hole in it, put a dowel, and then you epoxy that back in or glue it back in, and then you use something like those copper bands you see there, or a copper wrap or a brass wrap over it to provide a little extra rigidity there, and you nail it in place. And I mean, there's still guns that are repaired like that are being used decades after that repair, which is
So
kind
what?
of a cool thing to see.
Yeah, it's I have some questions about what do you think this is stocked in, and then what makes it a military musket? We have larger parts, it's heavier, it's got a bayonet lug, and then we know this is a British gun, but for those that wouldn't know that it's an English style gun, how do you know it's English, right? All muskets are
S-
muskets, and all muskets look the same, so it would be useful for just to kind of do, like how we instantly identify.
So a couple of things we're looking at here. Number one, the long land, of course, is going to be longer than the later short land and later India pattern guns. You're going to see a longer swell, which is where you see the stock get where it's right in front of the lock there. It's thicker, and then it thins out. That thicker piece is going to be the swell. So you're going to see a longer swell there than on a short land. The brass nose cap there at the very end, and the brass ramrod pipes, and then along with the style of lock, and then also like I mentioned earlier, the British are using pins in their barrels, so it's either brazing on, or like dovetailing in a barrel lug under it, and then you just drill a whole piece of pin through it, file the end so it fits right, and away you go. There's a lot less manufacturing involved into making a barrel with pins, as opposed to having to forge all the barrel bands and the springs and all the stuff to make that system work. So you see barrel bands on some Dutch guns later, but most of the time you see barrel bands in this era. My usual indication is going to be a French. It's going to be a French military piece. The other thing you're going to see is there's going to be some slightly different stock shapes, and that just comes from seeing these guns over and over again. You can kind of start to look at guns and go, "Oh, that's German, or that's English, or French." And this one is definitely an English stock shape, but they're also kind of taken from the Dutch muskets, which look very similar to these, and ultimately what the Longland's modeled on. Um, Trying to remember, this is okay. Yeah, so this is that Shortland. So next update of the Longland, or the first pattern, is going to be this, the second pattern, and we kind of call it the Shortland nowadays, but that's not really, as far as I remember, not a period term for it. So you can see overall similar styling. They're a few inches shorter, that same 75 to 78 caliber, but it's a little shorter. It's a little lighter, not a lot, but the swell in front of that stock, or in the front of the fore end of the stock there, you can see is also a little shorter. And then those are kind of the indications that it's going to be a short land. And then with the India pattern later, the cock there changes to a ring neck, so it actually where it has that bend right below the jaws to hold the flint. There's actually a ring there, like a circular hole, and there's pieces on both sides. It's kind of a cool look for some of the later Napoleonic War era Enfields, which I mean you do still see the Shortlands being used in that era.
And this is basically this, and then uh, the India pattern guns is the military flintlock that the British use all the way up into they replace them, right? Like it's more or less this. There's the commentary that the India pattern guns aren't as good as the Shortlands, but um,
I mean the it's going to be at the end of the day, it's going to be dependent on who's making it, and also I mean even down to amongst the different makers, which individual person's making it that day. And so yeah, the British do use they use brown bass until really the adoption of the 1851 pattern Minier rifle, and then later on the famous P53, which the P51 has to me one of the greatest nicknames of any military arm on the face of the planet. You got like later on the Cold War, you have the right arm of the free world as the FAL. The P51 as the destroying angel is just a name that will never be beaten as far as small arms nicknames. But yeah, so I'm trying to remember, it's like the 1830. I don't remember off the top of my head. It's like 1836 ish. They start converting some of these to percussion lock, and then it's like the 1842. So it's right about the time we're issuing still a 69 caliber smoothbore. The British are still issuing effectively an updated version of the land pattern musket, just with a percussion lock now instead of the older flintlock ignition. So this pattern was in use for over 100 years, and really about the only thing you see that you know outside of the flintlock musket and the French equivalent that's going to have even that long of a service life remotely possible is what you're seeing now with the Armalite pattern.
if you ever want a great book that breaks all of them down, check out The Brown Bess: An Identification Guide, Illustrated Study of Britain's Most Famous Muskets by Eric Goldstein and Stuart C. Mulberry. If you've ever, it's on Amazon. It's like the number one that pops up, but it's a great book and it's full colored on photos if you just want an introduction. So we talked about the German guns, and so I'm going to throw those up next. Hopefully you can see that, Andy.
Yeah, so that looks like a Potsdam. Um,
Yep.
so again, things I'm looking at here, you can see how the comb of that stock it's very straight on top, and then it has that weird hook shape to it. That's the first thing that's going to be showing me, okay, this is going to be a German or it's going to be a Potsdam, which is one of the arsenals that made these in the Holy Roman Empire. That lock style, that very bent lock with that longer tail, that smaller tail on the back, that's one thing I'm looking at, the style of trigger. And again, they're all just like little things. The more you look at pictures of them, it's like you start to see each of these little features. But for me, the big one with a Potsdam, of course, is going to be to see that stock right there. And then if you actually ever see the top of the comb of the stock, the butt plate is also very unique as far as the major European arms of the time. And that's one thing we don't really get to see a lot from these side on pictures is things like the trigger guard. The side plates on these are all a little different, so you start to learn them again the more you just get to handle both reproductions and originals, which we've both here had the pleasure and honor of being able to handle these and actually shoot some original flintlocks of the era.
So why such a high comb of the stock? That looks aggressive. It
Honestly,
almost
I
looks
don't.
sorry, and it almost looks like it's almost in line. The butt stock is almost in line with the barrel compared to like it doesn't have like that cow's foot, doesn't have that angle like you'd see in like a fowling piece. What do you think that's about?
Honestly, I don't have a clue. I've not done enough with the Germanic military arms to know. And if somebody does know, throw it in the comments. I am always willing to learn more. I can only really answer what I'm able to answer. But what's this piece?
It's another Germanic, and
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a Germanic gun, but I mean, it's still that one doesn't have this quite the same hook as the pot stand, but you can kind of see the top of the butt plate where it comes over the top, a very similar, and then a lock, the similar lock there to the previous piece. Who was the maker on this one? I don't remember.
it just says Germanic Revolutionary War. And for anyone that's wondering where I'm getting these pictures from, I'm getting them from online. I'm getting them online from auctions. So just a collection of Dan Morphy's Rock Island auction house, just stuff like that to provide these great pictures of originals. All credits, obviously, to the auction house and the owners. But yeah, this one's a Germanic one, and then you have this bayonet lug on the bottom, and then you have that brazed front sight post. How do
Yeah.
you braze a front sight post before you have like a welding tool?
Um, you have a piece of iron that you get forevermore red hot, and that you use an iron quite literally, kind of like you use a soldering iron but bigger, and you're using brass a lot of times with brazing.
Yeah, this is mind blowing. All right, so we've knocked out the English style, the German style, so just kind of throw it back. So this is a Germanic style. This is a Germanic style. How you can identify these is they're pinned in. The lock plates are longer and bent. The barrels are pinned in. The lock plates are longer and bent. It has brass thumb. Are they called thimbles? If I'm using that correct
Yeah,
terminology.
ramrod thimbles.
Ramrod thimbles. All right, and then here's your British one. Your British one. Those are brass. Those are really. It's hard to see in this picture, but those are brass ramrod thimbles. The lock plate, if you compare the two,
Well,
is
and earlier English pattern guns do use wooden ramrods, and those do have steel. And when they started moving to a steel ramrod, steel and steel tend to rust together, especially when it gets rainy and humid. So that's part of the reason of the switch to brass, if I remember that correctly.
well, when I was doing my research for Harper's Ferry Armory, one of the toughest things to do was to test the steel ramrods in like the 1820s because it has to bend at a certain degree and go in a circle basically. But yeah, there's a whole video right there that needs to be made just about the steel ramrod and how important that is to military muskets.
I mean, in
But
short, as somebody who's shot a lot of first model and has snapped a couple of ramrods when trying to, go really fast, and you get a little ahead of yourself and you end up snapping the end of the ramrod off, it's just a bad day for all parties involved. And then we'll go back to those people who, don't necessarily have the experience that some of us have of shooting these at a leisurely pace. Their first experience shooting it is when they join the army, which I mean that's still, you see that even in the modern military. There's some people that's their first experience with it, so you have to be able to have something that's to the end of the day, it's a theme throughout history. It has to be grunt proof.
heyo. And that's a great point about first time I ever shot an AR was in Marine Corps boot camp. And I'm pretty sure a majority of the guys that were there in 2009, that was their first time handling an AR platform. But it was 2009, so the assault weapons ban just ended in 2004. Story for a different day. If anyone has any questions throughout this video, please pop them into the comment section. I'll throw them on the screen for Andy here. And then next, we're going to do is it my favorite guns ever? Yeah, well, it's all right. So we've moved on to the premier military, the Continental Premier Military. And what are we looking at, Andy?
Yeah, how'd that work out for Napoleon? Didn't he lose a couple of times?
You remember at the highlight, life goes off the apex. And if losing means you get sent off to an island where you just get to retire, I mean, I'll take that.
Yeah, but so well, he tried to come back that first time. So, um, again with the French guns, the first thing I'm seeing right here, barrel bands. Also, that the combination of barrel bands and that underside bayonet lug you see right there at the front, and of course the French guns have a front sight that's not also a bayonet lug. It's on that very end barrel band there. Um, you can see the lock. It's a little bit flatter along the bottom as opposed to those bent, almost banana-shaped locks. And then, what was it you described that stock style as there, Luke?
Yeah, so this is your 1766 style. Somebody has gone in and filed down the comb of the stock.
Mhm.
You can kind of see it, um, but it's not as aggressive. There's really nothing to compare the German gun to. So
Yeah, I was
like
gonna say the
it's
German gun, those high flat topped. I don't. I'm not 100% sure what they were going for there, but then again, also out of all of these, the German guns are the ones I've had the least experience getting to handle, and I hope to resolve that because I actually have a friend of mine that's getting a Potsdam built. So I'd like to get some hands on and get some time with that when I get a chance to.
they don't really even make that many German reproductions too, from my understanding.
Rifle sh-
Like the brown bat,
rifle shop is.
something that does stand out to me about this French gun, this is 17, is that I've seen people where they file down the comb of the stock, and you do that to have better sight alignment. So somebody did that here to the comb of this stock. What makes it stand out is a 1766. If you don't know, this is kind of like my focus is these guns is um, it doesn't have that rear retention spring that holds in that lower barrel band. It does have those retention springs for your middle barrel band and your upper barrel band. And yeah, so those barrel bands, you just compress the springs and you can pop those off. You undo the screw on the tang of the barrel and you just pop the barrel off, and it really helps with cleaning.
Yeah, and I know we like to dig at each other with the bands over the pins or wedges. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I do think wedges end up being the best kind of a balance outside of a military context. In a military context, yes, the bands are by far the strongest method of attaching the barrel because it's literally an inch and a half, 2 inch piece of wide piece of steel there or piece of iron there that's going to keep that in place while you're using it for bayonet drill. You're going through the manual of arms, you're firing it, the rare occasion you're in battle and when you're actually doing practice. So and like you said, they're a lot easier to take off and clean. So at the end of the day, for a military gun, yes, I do believe bands are the superior way to go. In the way of I'm making them, especially through my portrayal of stocking guns in the 18th century, I don't have the means to make barrel bands for everything when I have pin stock.
Yep. And here's a first question. Why is we actually have two? We have one real question, one not. This is a Marine buddy I served with. He's being a great dude right now. Why is the M107 the worst weapon ever issued? I don't know. We'll figure that out in a later episode, Malcolm MG. But here's a good part of that question. Why did the Brits use brass fittings while mainland Europeans did not in many of your examples? Do you want to
Well,
take that?
the Dutch, which I don't know that we had a Dutch musket in here, and that Potsdam gun both use brass. As far as the French using steel, I'm honestly not 100% sure, and part of it probably has to come down to what's available and different things. Like I said, some of the original British guns when they used wooden ramrods were using steel fittings, but then once they moved over to the steel ramrods, which as weird and trivial as an upgrade as that might be, it is definitely a serious upgrade for these things as far as longevity and their ability to actually be used in the field and used in an expedient manner while you don't have to stop and slow down and worry about breaking the ramrod. So once they've kind of started to figure out that those two pieces would rust together, the British, if I understood them, if I remember it correctly, that's part of the reason they switched to brass. And also, brass is fairly easy to cast. Like you notice here, this French gun, it doesn't use ramrod thimbles. It uses It's a channel in the stock through the bands as opposed to running through the guide thimbles. So
Also,
it
oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
I was gonna say another reason I've seen that they use brass, especially for the British, is for the Navy. It's the Navy gun. It's less corrosive
Yeah,
than
the
the
sea
ocean
service guns do
shit.
use a lot of brass because of the salt. Which actually I think
This
some of the French sea service guns used brass too.
I'm trying to get that picture up right now, actually, and then also the Spanish. So countries that operated in the Caribbean are going to be using a lot more, but brass was used by the sea service guns. I'm gonna get one of them up real quick.
And as far as the M107 there, um, at least from from the outside looking in, it's like that's a very heavy piece that gets a weird rap because it often seems to get foisted into positions where it's not meant to be used. It's not a precision weapon. It's meant to hit a vehicle.
Yeah, Malcolm was in our scout sniper platoon on my deployment, and I asked him to come on and do a live stream about the M107, and he's like, to talk about how much I hate that thing, and I was like, okay.
I
So,
will chalk that up to snipers that I've met that hate that as an instrument. As far as using it in the nature of a precision piece, anything like that. I don't have a lot of experience with it myself. It's just a little bit of time on a flat range with one.
yeah, I've just shot one. I have video, but anyways, back to the 18th century. This is an example of a Spanish 1757. Apologies, Andy, I'm taking us all over the place, but you can see the
Oh, good.
Spanish.
That's why we're here.
Yeah, Spanish used those brass fittings, and the reason that, and then I'll get the French Marine one up next, but the reason I saw in like the late 1790s when the U.S. Navy was first established and the United States Marine Corps was first established, they were specifically asking the Navy Department was asking for brass fitted French guns or just brass fitted guns. So like the first weapon of the United States Marines would be probably like an English pattern musket. Because of those brass fittings, it's less corrosive because being on the ocean really destroys it. And to take it back to the first weapon of the Continental Marines is well, this is hard to say because the first weapon of the Continental Marines was just whatever they had in Philadelphia. But they did get a large selection of these French Marine muskets. And yeah, if you just want to, if anything stands out about it besides, like we've already kind of talked about, the brass fittings. And then there's just a random iron fitting in the middle, but that's where the swing, the sling swivel is. So I'm assuming it's harder to do the loop with brass.
That I don't know. I mean, I would kind of imagine so. Brass is a lot more flexible, and
Yeah, because
it work hardens a lot easier. But
because you work with brass, right? You actually do you casting with brass now?
we've done a little bit of casting, and then we swage butt plates. And one of the worst things you'll sit there and hear is you heat it up, and then you'll sit there and you'll quench it, which is almost reverse, or it's actually is reverse from steel. And you'll sit there and hear it, thunk, 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 and then when you start to hit that ting, like almost like you're hitting steel, and that's when you need to stop and go reheat it because the next time you hit it, it'll probably crack, and just it's a frustrating endeavor to try to learn. But once you start to get the hang of it, you start to get the feel of the sound and how it changes.
All right, so next we're gonna be moving on to is this popping up for us? I think I figured out how to get the right picture. This is an English fowling piece.
So right, kind of on our outline here, our show notes, as it were, we kind of have the thing is, it's the common man's gun. Effectively, a plain filing piece is going down to Walmart and buying a Remington 870. And then you have, of course, every country's going to have their own style. So this here is a French, looks like a French piece. You can see that deep swoop under it, and which the only other place I really see a lot of that similar style until kind of the what some people refer to as the golden age rifle is around the Lehigh Valley. But that's usually, especially with a smoothbore, indicative of a French gun. There is that deep curve in the on the underside of the wrist and the stock there. But the Fowling piece is kind of the subset of that, the trade gun. They're shotguns. They're useful for firing round ball, buckshot, birdshot, swan shot, whatever you need. And if you're only going to have one gun, this is the one to have in the 18th century, and especially on the East Coast, and really up until you start to push into the frontiers, which is where you start to see more rifles because you start to see more big game. Is over here, once people started getting access, a lot of big game was hunted out, and that's one thing I talk about, especially here in North Carolina, is buffalo were hunted out here in, I think, the 1740s or 50s, and elk were hunted out here by the end of the American Revolution. And even even as something as commonplace now as we think as white-tailed deer are almost eradicated. So that's part of the reason you start to see the rifles um, move to smaller bores, but you also see a lot of smooth bores because now you're hunting squirrels, rabbits, birds, anything like that. So things, nowadays, modern wise, you would use a shotgun. Yep, that's it right there. French influence. Okay, that's is that the New England gun?
Yep, this is the New England. I
Okay.
switched it on you. But yeah, if you want to talk about that real quick, because that's interesting to know. I guess, for one, for the uninitiated, say I don't know anything about flintlocks. You've shown me military. All right, I see the bands. I see the French. Like, this kind of looks like an English gun. What makes it a fowling piece? What is a fowling piece? What is a fowler?
So,
Let's
I
just
mean, a fowling piece is going to be what you use to, primarily hunt fowl. So they're going to be game birds effectively. So again, it's kind of that thing of anything, you think in the 21st century that you're going to hunt with a shotgun, you're going to hunt with a fowling piece. And again, it also gives that versatility of able to use shot, bird shot, buckshot, and also use round ball. But it's also going to be something where you're not primarily intending on using round ball in a hunting method usually. And then also in the neighborhood, in the nature of a military arm, these are a little quicker to load for militia service, which does lead into one of the reasons um, you see the rifle being very spoken ill of during the American Revolution, is because they don't have these like tangential relationships to a military arm. The other thing, and again, I've gotten the chance to handle a lot of these fowling pieces and a lot of original trade guns, is they're all so much lighter. They're thinner built. Um, this is going to be, the difference in carrying, a nice hunting or a hunting shotgun as opposed to, nowadays we'll make that reference as a carry into it to trying to carry an M107. One of them is built to be large and beefy. The other one is built to be light and carried over a long distance. It's not going to experience the same force of use, I guess would be the best way to put it. You're not going to be doing a lot of drill with these guns. You're not going to be bayonet fighting. Matter of fact, the vast majority you see can't even accept a bayonet here. So that's some of the things you look for. Is number one, it's not able to accept a bayonet. Number two, it's a lot slighter built. And then uh, sometimes you start to see them in smaller calibers. There are still larger calibers, effectively 10, 12, 20 gauge, kind of like you see nowadays, and everything in between. But those are the big things, namely the build and the not being able to accept a bayonet.
and this one's stocked in kind of like brings it back to where we started. This one's stocked in cherry.
Hmm.
So not cherry's not usually used for military, and then it's got a 50.5 inch barrel. It's wild.
Yeah, and they're definitely weird to walk through the woods with, but you kind of get used to how to navigate it through the woods the longer you carry it. Um, And you can kind of look at the cherry wood here. You don't see the same grain structure that you see in walnut or maple. This you kind of see this along more fruit woods where there's not that really rigid and large grain structure, but they're still very good hardwoods for making guns out of. And then of course cherry here, you're going to see that kind of that deeper red color to it, which really is just an oil finish. And then like you put up there, the New England guns kind of they're in their relation to New France, and then of course still the French influence remains after the British take it after the French and Indian War. Yep.
Okay.
No, that
And
I'm gonna
then
say no.
that
That
knocks
looks
out.
like an English piece.
Yep, this is what we have marked as our imported trade gun. So
Hmm.
here's a question. What is the difference between a trade gun and a fowling piece? Are all fowling pieces trade guns? Are all trade guns fowling pieces? You sometimes use you hear these words used interchangeably. People will call a trade gun a fowling piece or a fowler. But if you want to talk about the distinction, technically,
A
kind of.
a civilian smoothbore, it can be the fanciest thing that you can put together with silver and gold inlay and engraving. The guns of kings, effectively. To this trade gun, they're both fowling pieces because at the end of the day they're used for the same thing. They're used for hunting birds. They're used for fowling. And so as far as a trade gun goes, this is going down to, going down to Walmart, we're going to step down from the 870. We're going like the Charles Daly side by side. We're doing something like that. This is your Sears and Roebuck shotgun, effectively, of the era. They are made in England and in France. They're sent over by the crate, and one of their primary uses is to go out to trade with natives and also getting pushed out to the frontiers because they're so cheap and they can be so readily produced. There's no carving, there's no inlay. um, a lot of the ones you see that we kind of call the Carolina gun today, the Type G, which are both collectors terms for them. The brass on them is so thin that you can literally just bend the trigger guard. The butt plate is a piece of sheet brass that's hammered over at a 90-degree angle and nailed into place. So they're made to be mass produced. Any corner that can be cut is cut on them, but still maintains a reliable and functional firearm. One of the other things you'll see is instead of now this one is still looks like walnut from here. This is a small screen, so I can't really see all that well. Um, but you see them stocked in birch and beech and other cheaper woods like that, and you do see a lot of them painted, which is kind of cool. But you also see them going, "Hey, we kind of want better guns and trade over here." And then there actually are some trade rifles, which I've seen a couple, never got a chance to handle one. So those are still technically trade guns, but you see usually those specifically referred to out as trade rifles.
And why would you want to trade with the Native Americans? Wouldn't you just be arming the? I guess if you don't want to talk, if you want to talk about that, and then I'd like to talk about that as well because I did a little research on
Go ahead and take lead on this one. I want to hear what you say first on this one before I stick my foot in my mouth.
that. Well, it's just geopolitics boiled down. Because if you're in the colonies and you're arming up the natives, it's a very violent. Well, when it goes violent, it becomes very violent. So you'd think it would be counterproductive to trade firearms to the natives, but in reality, you can trade firearms to the natives, and you can have those natives now join your side in any upcoming wars, as well as like the natives want firearms. There's a benefit for them to have firearms. So it's like arming up your local Middle East militia to this day. Like you don't know what's going to happen. This could work out or this could not work out. But yeah, the Native Americans dropped their bows and got flintlocks and firearms as quickly as possible. just because of the value of it. And it goes against a little bit of the modern mythos that, these things aren't accurate, these things aren't anything. It's like, well, if they weren't accurate, it's not like the natives are producing black powder. So, there's a whole reason that they picked up these arms as well. And
Well,
that was kind of my rant.
and accuracy is something that's kind of gotten skewed with modern firearms. Nowadays to, take a modern precision rifle out to a mile is it becomes more of a math equation than a skill equation at that point in time. And even, Marines, yes, I know you're shooting at something the size of a Jeep, but you're still shooting out to what, 600 in
Five,
basic,
500, yeah.
500. Yeah, you're still shooting at something effectively the size of a Jeep. Sorry, that's my dad in the background. Just a second.
The kind of talking about the point versus area target, like what you're talking about. This is a discussion I have in a lot of my videos. A musket is accurate out to 100 yards. A musket is accurate out to 200 yards. A musket is like, I think we need to we need to define these terms. Like a musket is effective, I would argue, 150, 200 yards. It's accurate out to 75 to 100. What do I mean by that? In the Marine Corps, you're trained to shoot a point-sized target 20 inches across out to 500 yards. That is the point target being an individual man. You're also trained to know that an area target being like a car is 800 meters. So you should be able to hit a car at 800 meters. You should be able to hit a man at 500 meters. If we take that back to the 18th century, you should be able to hit a man-sized target 75 to 100 yards. You should be able to hit a line of enemy infantry, which would be your block, at a one set 150 to 200. And then there's just so much more that goes into that I don't want to get caught up on because I know this will be a whole. It's something I'm working on, but you have terrain, experience, powder, the tactics of the time. Like just a lot goes into accurate versus effective fires.
Yeah, and
So
kind of your thing there of the 500-yard target, the B modified is 6 foot square, and then the outside ring is 60 inches, so 5 feet.
yeah,
You know,
so like you're hitting big, and that's with a modern military arm.
yeah,
But so like it's good to have that knowledge, and I feel
yeah,
like
that's
that's
it.
sometimes lost in the reenacting world or just the thinking back on history world. If you don't have a lot of experience with shooting, you're just gonna think parade ground, you're able to hit out to this distance. It's like, well, they probably could load as fast as they could and hit as well as they did, but like having been on the in whatever over there and doing this kind of stuff is like this did not line up to my training. I am shooting a tree line and I think I'm hitting the tree line. I
It,
don't know.
it's kind of from the competitive side. Does the shooter understand the course of fire? And then you just scream because your entire match plan just went out the window.
Oh yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, but here's a good question to bring us back. Why were larger calibers used in the military guns, whereas smaller calibers were deemed adequate for hunting?
so that's not necessarily even the case. So a lot of these filing pieces that you see are 62 to 75 caliber. They're still the same size that the British military carbines are using, a 62 up to the 75, and sometimes a little bit larger pieces that you're seeing from military muskets. And when we get talking into specifically the Jaeger rifles later, um, you see some of those up into 80 and 90 caliber rifles. So it depends on what you're hunting is what the caliber. If you're shooting squirrels, you're not taking a you're not we'll go back to the M107. You're not taking an M107 squirrel hunting with you. So, if you're going hunting for light armored vehicles, you're also not taking a or soft skin vehicles, you're also not taking a 22 rifle with you. It's you see the Jaegers because they're hunting stag, they're hunting things like that where the game is going to be the property of the margrave or the prince or the emperor or the king, wherever you're at. Whereas over here, it's kind of a free for all. So you start out seeing these larger caliber guns because they're hunting bison, they're hunting elk, they're hunting deer, and then as those are hunted out, you start to see guns get smaller. You see them go from being about 62 caliber rifles and 62, 62-ish, so 20 gauge Fowlers down to in the 30s, 32, 36, 40 caliber, better to hunt smaller game with like squirrels and rabbits. Because you hit a rabbit with a 62 caliber, there's not going to be a lot left in the ears and a cotton ball.
Do you
But
think there would
then,
be sorry, do you think
go ahead.
that the powder and raw materials also kind of factored in? Less powder needed for a fowling piece, less lead needed for the ball.
Part of it's that it's kind of that balance of what are you hunting versus how much do you want to spend? Because that was going to be the next thing I was going to get into is a larger ball moving fast, moving to a hunting velocity is going to take more lead and more powder. But if you're hunting buffalo or elk, that's the trade-off you have to make, as opposed to hunting squirrel. Well, now it's like number one, I don't need as big of a hunk of lead flying down range, so now I can get a lot more out of that pound of lead instead of 12 or 20 shots to the pound. Now I can get, let's see, you can get like 60 or 70. You're using a lot smaller ball to hunt something smaller. And then with that, also is coming using less powder with these smaller bores. So it's kind of an efficiency versus necessity, or effect on target, I guess would be efficiency versus effect on target. And then you start to see the rifles get a little bit bigger with things like the Hawken rifles that come in, the buffalo guns when you cross the Appalachian Mountains and get out into past that plateau, you get out into the Great Plains where you're hunting buffalo again. Well, now you need to go back to a gun with a larger bore that you can really thump something with. And things like the sharps, like 45 110 and 45 120 sharps. So you're throwing a bigger chunk of lead a whole lot faster as opposed to say a 32 caliber squirrel gun back over here in North Carolina and Tennessee.
Yep. And so, anything else you want to say about the fowling pieces or trade guns? And then I want to bring it back to the American assembled militia guns, committee safety guns, before we move on to the rifles, if that's okay with you, Andy.
Sure, sounds good to me. I mean, really, the last thing with the military being the larger caliber. Number one, with a military gun, you're shooting undersized ball. So a British musket, a 75 caliber, you're shooting 680 or 690 caliber round ball out of it. So that also allows you to shoot a lot longer with the always present powder fouling, and also again provides that effect on target that you need. It's going to carry that mass to make a sure impact at the other end when you get hit with something that size.
Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to move into kind of closing out the military arms and looking at the variety of American versions of this. And we'll start with, I think this is the curly maple. And
Hmm.
if you start from the beginning, you're going to see a couple things pull in from what we've talked about. And if you want to talk about that, like what is a American stocked gun? Why do we even have them? And you know,
So starting in you know really kind of the immediate era before the shooting starts of the American Revolution, you have what are being stood up called committees of safety or committees on public safety, and they're sitting there going, well, we need to, especially at the start, we need to declare our rights as Englishmen. So now they're going, okay, well, what is the one thing we can do as Englishmen? Well, we can bear arms. So we need to start being able to arm ourselves, and as a militia to be able to called out to service, we need things that are more of a military pattern. So you start getting pieces. what are now usually called like committee of safety muskets, where they're contracting with local builders and they're going off of styles of things they use, but they're also using more available parts. Like you can see this one here, it's got a steel nose cap and ramrod thimbles because that's probably what they're able to work with. That one earlier was stocked with maple. That's a very common wood here in the New World. So you can use that, and you have gunsmiths that are used to working with maple. And it's always kind of cringe looking at these a little bit because nowadays that piece of maple would be worth a lot of money with a very finely built rifle because you can see very highly stylized with the curl in it. And other things they're using available parts from guns that may have had the stock broken in a way that's not easily fixed. So they're sending them out to smiths and these kind of the precursors to the American arsenals to rebuild them with what they can, and they're using these parts to put on, effectively restocking these guns with the old parts, which is something you do see done um, earlier as well with some rifles being brought over. If the stock breaks, well, now we can restock it. Now I don't have to buy a new lock and barrel. We just have to put everything back together. And one thing we talk about a lot in the 18th century is the materials are expensive, the labor's cheap, because there are, I think, like looking in Salisbury, I think there's like 20 something gunsmiths between Salisbury and or Rowan County and Mecklenburg County. So there's definitely a large number of people. And then, of course, you move up into Pennsylvania, there's a large number of people there that are making these guns because about every county you run into up there has its own school of design.
And what stands out to me about this one, so we have a combination of French parts, I'm assuming that stock is American maple or maple that was cut down in America. That lock, it's got like 1766 barrel bands, but it's hard to tell if that lock is a 1766 lock because it has the just the snake cock. So like just it's like a perfect example of like just the amalgamation of different types of pieces thrown together. And I've seen calibers for these. You're gonna have got French, French locks and parts, and it's gonna be like a 75 caliber or an 80 caliber, or you'll see British locks on pieces that are 69 caliber, which is kind of more, as much as you can say standard, which I know you can't really say standard, but towards the end of the revolution, we're more or less standardizing around 69, or at least trying to, as best as you can when your army is in, you know, a work in progress, to say the least. And here's another one of the another American assembled piece. Again, like you see, it looks like a brown Bess. Well, let's see if I can get the other brown Bess
So
up and
it looks like a brown Bess if you squint. Um,
on.
the and again, kind of like we talked about the trade gun, you can look at that the butt there. It's 90 degrees, and it looks like a very thin butt plate. I would about wager that that thing's just basically flat on the end and hammered over. It doesn't have kind of that shaped round piece that you have on a properly made English musket. This is we need guns. We need guns yesterday.
Yep, and here's an
Yeah,
example of here's a brown Bess, a pattern 1777, and look at the buttstock, look at the cock,
and
look at the lock plate.
especially kind of up there at the top, kind of where it fit the top of the stock will fit into the top of your shoulder. That's kind of where I'm talking about. There's more of that rounded ball right there as opposed to hard 90 degrees.
And I think that's a French lock. I think that's like a 1728 lock because it's got like the
Yeah.
step down. It's hard to see from that picture.
Well, it's almost like once you start shooting at the English don't want to give you parts anymore.
It's unfortunate. All right, so then we have our Committee of Safety musket, and then this is our Militia Man musket. Allegedly, this is to Lexington, and it kind of just ties in what we've been talking about. So you have what's unique about this one. I'll let you pull off that, but before that, like you can see, it's got like that English style of pattern of gun. and then it's the barrel's held in by pins. You have your ramrod thimbles. But what stands out to you about this gun?
First thing is it's a dog lock. So a dog
What does
lock
that
is
mean? A dog lock?
yeah, that was what I was about to get to there. So a dog lock is almost the immediate, or is the immediate precursor of the flintlocker. I believe it was originally some of the names were calling it the French lock without the dog. So this piece you see here with the hook on it will slot into that notch on the back of the cock. I don't know why I'm pointing with my mouse. I don't think you can see me. Um, but there's a notch right above that screw on the cock there, and it will fit into that dog, and that is the safety mechanism. Effectively, it also has an internal piece that that further adds to the safety, but it's ultimately kind of replaced by the half cock, and it's a much older system. So you see these late 16th, or sorry, late 17th, early 18th century that are ultimately replaced by the flintlock, or by the proper flintlock.
Okay, and we have a question here for you, Andy. It says, do you see a variation in stocks based on regional origin, i.e., maple in the Northeast versus oak in the South? I know we've kind of talked about it, but if you just want to cover it.
So as far as the stock woods, it really depends on where you're at. Um, a lot of it's going to be New World, Old World kind of stuff. New World maple is everywhere. They're large, they're readily available. And then you have things like persimmon over here that I'm actually got one started in the basement that's going to be stocked in persimmon, which is another wood that I don't really know how available it is outside of the South, but I know down here in the South it's fairly fairly easily found. Now, if you can find it in the size enough to make gun stocks, it's a little harder. But so you don't necessarily see as much with the stock wood as opposed you do the styling. So up in New England, you're going to see this weird combination of English and French styles, like that trade or that American trade gun Fowler that we showed earlier is kind of more the New England style. So you saw the where this English piece here you're looking at has that very straight line from the trigger guard to the butt. It's a very straight, whereas the French you see that deep curve in it. So you see though kind of that amalgamation of style up north. The other thing you see is some Dutch styling because, as some of you out there may know, if you're listening to this channel, I feel assured that you know that New York was originally New Amsterdam, so there was some Dutch styling up there, and a lot of Dutch up that way. So you see there what's called the club butt Fowler, and it's a very, very Dutch style. It looks almost like the stock on that Potsdam does. It's a very beefy kind of rectangular stock, as opposed to having that tapering shape of English and French guns. And then you move into the South, Pennsylvania and North Carolina. You see a lot of German influence because, and especially Western North Carolina, because Pennsylvania, that's what a lot of it is once you get outside of, Philadelphia. Quite literally one of the battles of the Philadelphia campaign is the Battle of Germantown. And then of course, Pennsylvania Dutch still spoken up there among some communities. And Christian Springs is a Moravian community. So they're a German religious sect that moves over. And you start seeing the guys that are building these, their names are like Schreier and Albrecht and Betts and Beck. All of I think I said Albrecht. So you see all of these very German names, and a lot of these guys are trained in Saxony, trained in Ansbach and in Hanover, and they're coming over and moving into that area. And then they kind of follow the mountains down, and then they get into Western Virginia, which is where some of my family ends up, and then down into to North Carolina around Salem and around Salisbury, which the city of Salisbury, of course, a very English name. But when you get out into Rowan County, German is still spoken there until as a first language for some people into the 1930s and 40s, and then still spoken kind of in the home in passing there in Cabarrus County into like the 1970s. So you see definitely the heavy German influence there. Now, once you get out east, again, you go back to seeing less rifles, more smoothbores out in eastern North Carolina. You do see some rifles, but again, those are going to be your more of your Germanic settlers there. But you start to see more English styling the same way you see around the James River in Virginia, because that's going to be more heavily settled by the English. So they're going to be rifled guns. And I keep going to point, but I can't. You can't see it. They're going to be rifled guns, but they're going to look much like the style of what you see here. They're going to have those flowing lines of an English piece as opposed to the shorter, wider buttstocks of the early German pieces that come over here, like we're going to talk about here in a little bit with Jaegers.
Yep. And we'll move on to the next part. So we've covered the military arms, and now let's move more into the specialized arms. Going off our outline here, Andy, we're going to be talking about wall guns first. So let's see if I can get this French wall gun. All right, here it is. This picture doesn't really do it justice because we need to see size comparisons. What are we
Yeah,
looking at? What is a wall gun?
I mean it's the name of it is fairly explanatory. It's a gun that you won't mount it on a wall, or you want to mount it on a rampart. So you see, matter of fact, I believe the French actually call theirs rampart guns, which also may be of French origin. I don't. I just build them. I don't speak the languages. Um, but these guns, the French don't do it as relatively speaking. Their guns are closer to the size of their wall guns are closer to the size of an English infantry musket. So they're 75-ish bore. They're beefier. They're firing a heavier powder charge, and they're meant to be put onto a mount on a rampart, and it's meant to be able to shoot a lot further. And effectively, they're working as light artillery. These are shooting at engineers working, sappers. They're shooting at artillery crews, anything like that that you need to kind of take a longer off shot with, because you can put a lot more powder behind these big beefier pieces than even a military musket. And also, some of the British guns you can see where they're actually mounted through with a into a yoke. So the rampart itself that you're shooting off of is taking a lot of that recoil force. So, matter of fact, I think I have it put here of dealing with the recoil management. It's the gun's heavy, preferably it's mounted to something heavy, and you have a personal vendetta against your shoulder.
Yeah, so it's got a wooden ramrod, no need for a bayonet lug. This is something you just set up. And if Ethan Woods from 11 Bang Bang had made one from a rifle shop kit, and he shot
Mhm.
that, and he has a whole video about it. So yeah,
And
they're
the other way you see them actually mounted to small carts. They're called amusets. So again, it further functions as that role of light artillery. One of the things that amusets are specializing in is counter battery fire, because you can get this thing around and loaded a lot quicker, and you're starting to shoot gunners. You're shooting the axles of guns. You're shooting anything. It's an anti-material piece. You know, for your guy out there with about the 107, this is the 107 of the 18th century. You also do see some rifled wall guns. Similar principle. They're built heavier, heavier powder charge, thicker walls of the barrel, and they're meant to throw larger pieces of lead a long ways. Y I was gonna say there's actually a lot from one at Guilford Courthouse Visitor Center, and I don't recall the source off the top of my head, but there's something like 1,000 of these French Rampart guns that end up in the hands of specifically North Carolina militia. Which how exactly they were used, I don't know. If it was used as a just a guy having to carry a beefy musket, I feel sorry for that poor sod. But there ended up being a bunch of these French rampart guns here in North Carolina service, including at Guilford Courthouse, which we actually have the lock dug there. I think it's a 1717 pattern. Luke, you can correct me if I'm wrong there.
Oh, for the sorry, what was that part? Looking
For
up the Joseph Plum Martin reference.
um, the Rampart gun lock that's at Guilford Courthouse, it's an earlier French lock. I think it's like
Oh,
1717.
yeah, it is. It is a 1717 because I took a picture of it. Or is it 1728? I'll have to go looking through my photos again.
Oh, and the Joseph Lynn Martin one, that's where they shoot the guy picking apples or something, and then
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can find this reference because he pegs it. You talk, and I'll find the reference because I want to read it because it's one of the greatest things ever written by Joseph Plum Martin.
let's see. Let's see if I can find it real quick. Um, yeah, go ahead. I'll
Yeah, so basically Joseph Plum Martin at the battle, right after the Battle of Long Island, he withdraws over to Manhattan Island, and he has a reference of a one of the soldiers in his company. There's like British on the other side of the whatever that river is, and they're outside of musket range, right? And they're also outside of rifle range. So Joseph Plum Martin says like they're over there, and this guy brings out a barrel that has, according to Martin, is like 6 feet long,
Yep,
and
I've
takes a
I've
shot
found it
at the
right here.
guy. Oh, okay, yeah, if you want to read it,
Um,
it's great.
it kind of starts. It says there's a small party of British upon an island in a river. One of the soldiers, thinking perhaps he could do more mischief by killing some of us, had posted himself at a point in the rocks and kept firing at us as we passed along the bank. Um, yeah, but here's the part where he rested his old 6-foot barrel across a fence and sent an express to him. The man dropped, but as we then thought it was only to amuse us, we took no further notice of it but passed on. In the morning, upon our return, we saw the brick colored coat still lying in the same position we had left him the evening before. It was a long distance to hit a single man with a musket. It was certainly over a half a mile. And with the if it is truly a 6 foot long gun, you're starting to look at things like a rampart gun here or a wall gun, but I don't think it actually specifically references this being a wall gun. But it does say that he is propped up against a fence there.
Yeah, there's a great article by Journal of the American Revolution called "The Long Shot of September 1776." I'll put this down in the link
Yep,
below. You
that
can
was
read
what I
all
was
about
reading
it.
out of.
Oh, okay, yeah. At the end of the article, it says like Joseph Plum Martin might have gotten his distances a little off, but still, it's the reference of making a long shot. Assume we don't know what it is. I've heard assumptions that it is a wall gun, but we may never know. If you ever wonder what a wall gun or a rampart gun is, then that's what this is. So before we move on to the next piece, which is going to be the Ferguson rifle, do you have anything else to say about the wall guns?
Not really. They're a weird niche spot of this era that ultimately don't last into the next era of military advancement. You don't see them in really far into the percussion era, and these and swivel guns operate off the light, like I said, the light artillery principle.
Yep. And do I need one? That's a story for another day. Next up is the Ferguson rifle. Again, talking to somebody as if they have no real experience or exposure to 18th century warfare, we almost always think of the rifle as a uniquely American, and even past that, maybe German. But what is the Ferguson rifle?
So the Ferguson rifle is specifically the military pattern, which you're looking at here. It is a rifle that's designed by Major Patrick Ferguson, who is noted as being, one of, if not the best shot in the British Army. And like it shows here, as opposed to having to load from the muzzle, the breech itself actually screws down and you can see and load it from the rear and the top. So you put the ball in and you load it with powder from behind and you close it. if you're back to that thing of the parade ground shooting, if you're standing there shooting, upright as fast as you can get 6 rounds a minute out of the thing as opposed to 3, from a muzzle loading musket. Also, you're getting 3 rounds from a rifle as opposed to 3 rounds from a smoothbore, which gonna give you a little bit more precision or a lot more precision, especially at distances in excess of 100 yards, which once you get far past that, a musket, switches from being that point effect to more area effect like we talked about earlier. So, ultimately, it's a piece that I find absolutely fascinating, and there was something like 200, 250 of these things built. 100 of them make it over to the colonies. Their military actions in large numbers were Brandywine and Paoli, which happened right back to back. After that, take this with a large grain of salt. There is a possibility that there are a couple, and when I say a couple, no more than 5 that take part here at the Battle of Kings Mountain. When I say here, it's not far down the road from me. Um, there's a lot of conjecture there both ways. I tend to believe that they weren't there, but you don't say first, last, never, and only. So there is a slight possibility that there were a handful of them there. There were not 100 Ferguson rifles there. Um, one thing I do want to go back and research one of these days is at the start of the American Civil War. There are some of these things. I think they're in Raleigh, and they don't get issued or anything, and I don't even know why they're here. But they end up getting taken or destroyed once the war moves into North Carolina in '65. Don't quote don't quote that as gospel. I'm pulling it from something that I read probably 8 or 9 years ago, but I want to go back and do more research into the validity of those claims to see if there were actually any here, and then if there were, I want to figure out why they were here.
A
But
breech loading, I guess is it technically a breech loading? It's a breech
yeah, it's
loading
breech loading.
military
You
rifle.
you, you load from the breech, yes.
So why didn't the British, why didn't they adopt this? Like, this is the next great thing. This is everything we ever wanted. Um,
Ultimately, it's a case of the good idea fairy showing up. Um, and again, to kind of go back to our outline here, I like the way you put it. The question is, was it a mechanical marvel or a logistical nightmare? And I added, or both, because at the end of the day, it was both. To have the manufacturing capability to cut those threads on that screw to the point where it would lock up and it would seal with a little bit of lubrication or like a little bit of a wax, not a wax, but a grease. Um, to do that was a feat of engineering, and these were only made by people like Durzag and firms that could make high end sporting guns that had a very high reputation for precision in the era. So ultimately, one of the big things is they're more expensive, 6 to 8 times more expensive than a musket. And back to what we talked about earlier, they're not grunt proof. That screw breech, congratulations, you've added a large hole right through the middle of the stock, and you've created a weak point, which is where the originals that we see break right around there. And the other thing is, if you look very carefully with this, as opposed to a lot of the other locks, this only has one lock screw holding it in, or a lock bolt holding it in, as opposed to two. And if I remember right, you're having to drill a blind hole with this one because the lock bolt attaches from the outside as opposed to going all the way through the gun. So again, it's a piece that in the hands of somebody who's trained, who's not going to beat it about, who is able to get the full use out of this piece. Yes, it's a wonder weapon, but as most all wonder weapons fall apart is the cost of manufacture and use and the inability to adapted to a wide scale user. Which I mean, even in America, and I think you've done a video on it later on. The next thing you really see in the American military is the Hall rifle, which they're not issued to everybody at the end of the day. They're issued to certain specific people who know how to get more use out of them than a muzzle loading musket.
And with the Hull rifle, it's again the same sort of thing. There's reports going back like we're spending way too much money to get everything set up and running, and like at the end of the day, you get 1 to 2 shots more, but powder still, there's just a whole lot that goes into the logistics. Next, we're going to look at the other British rifle, English rifle. I didn't even really know was a thing until I got into reenacting, and that's the 1776. Hopefully, is this the 17? I have the right picture,
Yes,
right? Okay,
that's the
that's cool.
Hanoverian pattern.
Okay, it looks very close to a
Yep,
Jaeger, but
it's
yeah,
it's
cool.
the that's effectively what it is. It's what happens when you take a Jaeger, a civilian Jaeger, and make it a military rifle. So back to some of these things we talked about earlier, you beef up the features. And the one thing that tells me this is the Hanoverian pattern is there's that wooden sliding patch box on the buttstock. The Birmingham made guns didn't have that. So the American rifleman, and I've probably said this before on your channel, early in the war often are more of a almost a piece of propaganda in a way. You have officers writing back of, they fear they should be failed by these American riflemen, and you see things like that. You see their depictions in German papers as these bearded savages from the frontier that are coming out to do as they may. So the British go, okay, we need our own rifles. There are sporting rifles in England at the time. There aren't really military rifles. So they go, okay, well, who's our allies that can make rifles? The Germans. So, you see Ansbach, Brunswick, um, Hesse Castle, which of course where we get Hessians from, Hanover. You see places like that that are they already have these agreements. Which I can't. Have you done a video talking about the Hessians lately?
No, I
If you
haven't. I
if you
Josh Shope is gonna come on
Okay, I was gonna say Shope will do a phenomenal job, and he's done a world of research into an oft overlooked but very important part of this war in America. But back to kind of what we're talking about here, they go, "Hey, we need rifles." So they design this piece, which is sort of a Jaeger, sort of a military gun. It's to accept British carbine ball, which is 62 caliber. You can see at the very muzzle of this, you see it looks like the barrel's broken away and there's a hole in it because that ramrod originally was supposed to have a swivel on it so you could keep the ramrod in one piece. And then, of course, the sliding patch box is a very German feature that doesn't carry over to the English gun. And there's 200 of these built in Hanover and another 800 of these built in England. Rifle Shop carries the English pattern, which I'm in progress. So it's my workbench is in pieces right now. But a friend of mine, Ben, who we've had on the channel before, he actually recreated the Hanoverian pattern from scratch, and it looks phenomenal. But these come over in the pattern 1776. They start showing up really around the time of the Philadelphia campaign is one of the times I see them here, and it is. I will go as far as say this is the first of what we now term a designated marksman's rifle. Their original issue is to the light infantry companies, to regiments like the 33rd, which after the loss of Cornwallis's light battalion at Cowpens, they act in a way of a light battalion, as well as I believe the guards do as well down here in the South. But these are issued out, and they're supposed to be issued to the men who are the best shots. So they're kind of like we talked about the Ferguson. These are the people that know how to use a rifle to its effect, full effect, as opposed to, oh, we're going to give him this and hope he can hit something with it. No, you're giving it to guys who can shoot. And like a lot of the Jaegers that you see, these are shorter guns, very much in that Germanic style, which I believe is something we'll actually get into a little bit later. Actually, maybe the next point. But you see them to be shorter. They're easier carried, maneuvered through the woods, and they have that same thing of that heavier, that 62 caliber bore that you see with some of the heavier caliber rifles of the era, especially in military carbines. This is a rifle I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole on lately. They're really cool. It's an interesting piece that doesn't get a lot of interpretation, and I'm glad we've got a couple floating around now. And I really want to see more with these done over the next few years here in the 250ths.
Does it's the American Revolution Museum at Yorktown has one of these, but does it have the German version or the other version?
No, they have the English version. So the museum at Yorktown has one. Colonial Williamsburg has one, and the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia has one. And one of these days, I would love to be able to get hands on an original to to get a feel of it to see hey, how can I improve the kit build to make it a little closer to the original pieces that we have to to better show that off in the field and to better interpret this part of the part of the war that doesn't get a lot of discussion.
And to give our museum shout out, the Art Museum of Colonial Williamsburg has a large selection of firearms in the basement, and it's free. You can just walk in. So if you're ever in Colonial Williamsburg, go down there. You can look at an original 1763. All right, so we're gonna move on past the British version to the Hessian Jäger rifle. Oh, I gotta remove a photo. Hold up. Let's get this one in and Hessian Jäger. It looks
So
the same.
more or less, I mean, that's because they're patterned off of each other. And with the metal ramrod on this one, is this what did you use the no? It looks like the pistol Jaeger, but I don't remember off the top of my head. It definitely looks like a Hessian gun with that trigger guard. So this is the other answer to the American rifleman is we're gonna bring our own riflemen. So you start bringing over the German Jaegers, they're the German light infantry, and like certain parts of America, Virginia, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, the Germans are noted for their use of the rifle, especially among their hunters. And these guys are carrying shorter guns, heavier calibers. Back to what I said, they're hunting things like stag over there. And a lot of the people that are doing the hunting they have a lot more skill. There's a reason they're called Jaegers. They're hunters, and so they are people who again know how to use these rifles. And at the first of it, they're bringing over what are still effectively personal guns, and then as those get transitioned out, you start to get more of this military pattern here, which you can see has a bayonet. Looks like it has a bayonet lug there on the front, has a metal ramrod. My apologies there. And then, like you see the American rifles from Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, you also see German rifles have different styles based on where they're from. You see some further south in like Ansbach, and then you see in what's now the Czech Republic further south than that, and then Hanoverians, Hanover, Saxony, basically anywhere they kind of have their own school of design based on function, based on stylistic choices, whatever you want to. That's gonna the first thing is it's gonna be a rifle. You need it to function, and you needed to do the job you need to do. After that, then it's gonna be like, okay, well, what do I want? What do I like? What stylistic choices do I like? And then, of course, the military stuff, it's going to be okay, we're going to take a little bit of that and then we're going to make it proof for the field effectively. And You see these ultimately kind of morph into, or their final form of the Jaeger is with things like the Austrian Stutzjäger, which again, do you mind I plug another channel?
Oh, go ahead. Absolutely.
So Cap and Ball does a wonderful bit about the Stutzjäger in the Napoleonic Wars. Also, if anybody out there is a fan of Sharp, the 95th and the 60th, the Baker rifle is kind of toward the end of this era, because really much after this and much after the Napoleonic War is when you start to move into the mass issue of rifles to everybody with the invention of things like the mini ball and the Minier rifle and the P53, and I can't remember what the French version was, or the French rifle was, but something very similar. So then you see the guns get longer again because now they're back to firing in two ranks. They're firing volleys, much like they're doing right now or in this era with smoothbores. That was a really, really long rambling thing. Let me see if I can get this back to where I was at. So the Jaegers, they are going to be shorter guns. You're hunting in places like the Black Forest. So you want a shorter, handier gun. You also need something that's a little beefier. So one of the things of a a Germanic style gun is the buttstock. Some of them are going to be very thick as opposed to later American rifles. They're going to be a lot shorter. And one thing the Germans have access to that you don't have access to in the colonies is better powder that burns in a more efficient manner than American powder that's manufactured here, that burns a little slower by the standard of black powder. But that's part of the reason you start to see the longer barrels as gunsmiths move over here and continue to build what ultimately becomes the American long rifle.
Which is a perfect plug because that will be our next version of that. It's going to be these photos are reproductions pulled off of the muzzle loading form. This piece belongs to, let's give him the proper accreditation,
Mike Gahagan.
Mike Gahagan.
Yep.
So he, yeah, we've talked about the British, well, we've talked about the German rifles. Now move into the iconic American long rifle. We've done videos about this, a couple live streams. So if you can make it, we don't have to do the full 50-minute version, but just an overview.
So there's kind of an intermediate step here in between this rifle and the Jaeger rifle. So of course the first Jaeger rifles you see coming over are those larger 60, 70, 80 caliber guns. And one particular group of people I follow is the Moravians. So they come into Christian Springs, which is in the Lehigh Valley, and they bring these heavier German style guns, the Jaegers, over. And then kind of the first step off of that is when you see built for a guy named Edward Marshall. Which, if you ever want to look up an interesting thing, read about the walking purchase and a little bit about the life of Edward Marshall, and you'll kind of understand why he needed a good rifle. But it's a little longer than some of the Jaegers. It's where you start to see that first step away from the shorter guns for these dense forests that are good on horse, hunting from horseback, things like that. And you start to see more of that necessity of needing the longer barrel for the powder. And then this is kind of the next step after that. This one's based off of one in a book called Rifles of Colonial America, number 42 out of that book. And this one's possibly built by a guy named Valentine Beck in Salem, North Carolina, actually. So this is kind of that next step away from those Jaegers. Again, you see the barrel get a little bit longer. So now this has, you've gone from again, weird talking about modern firearms. You go from a relatively short barrel of 32 or 34 inches to a barrel of like 45 to 48 inches long, which Ben actually just finished one that's based kind of on this one and based on one of a rifle we have described that was owned by Daniel Boone. It's a 66 caliber and it's about a 48-inch barrel, so you start to really see those longer barrels. over here in the New World. And the other thing that does help with is sight radius. It doesn't make the gun itself more mechanically accurate, but through the way we perceive and aim, it does increase that distance there and allows us to take a little bit of a finer sight. So that's kind of why some of the reasons you start to see this form of the rifle exist. And then from here you start to, after this, because this rifle I believe is finished in like 1771. After this, and oh, that's another thing in this picture I want to talk about. That patch box right there, the brass patch box, until the Baker rifle, this is an American thing. The Germans had the Germanic rifles had patch boxes, but a lot of those are sliding wood. I think you see some that are made out of horn, which looks really cool. But the brass patch box is an American thing. Again, it's material that we have to work with. It allows you to be a little more decorative when you start to look at someone like the York and Lancaster rifles later, and especially as you move into the golden age of rifles, kind of that 1790 to about 1810, 1820, where they get further away. Like I said, you start to get the small bore, so you get a lot thinner guns, a lot smaller guns, and there's a lot more art to it because now it's become also more of its own art form. So you see a lot more inlay and silver and brass, and it, I think they look hideous, but I can respect the artwork behind them if that makes any sense. But this rifle here, RCA 42, is kind of two steps removed from those Jaegers, so you can still see that the similar style of stock that you had on that Jaeger rifle we saw there. And you can also, if you handle one built like this, you can also see that it's still a much thicker butt than some of the English guns that are noted for being very thin and light. And then the other thing you'll see is right there, that hook at the back of the trigger guard. Under that, the wrist steps up from the bottom and from the top. So that's also another thing, kind of like we're talking about identifying guns. It's called a stepped wrist. That's also a very German feature that you'll see in rifles. That again, kind of really much after this era and much after the American Revolution, kind of disappears over here because you kind of get more of that long sweeping curve, like I talked about with that New England Fowler we were looking at, and also guns like in the Lehigh Valley. Everything kind of converges. It's a lot of convergent evolution to that point where you get what becomes the American long, the stereotypical American long rifle that fights the War of 1812, goes to New Orleans with Andy Jackson, and then all the way out to fighting Santa Ana at the Alamo. And that scroll work there you see on the stock. That's also another very German feature that you see is a lot of the carving as opposed to things like wire inlay and kind of the simple elegance of some of the English guns. It speaks for itself. Here there's a lot of the artwork on the gun also shows that it's a Germanic piece.
Also the cheek rest, right? Like that's so interesting. That's what's always blown my mind is that there's a cheek rest in these 18th century firearms, and that kind of goes away until 20 years ago when they started to bring them back for military arms. Not many, I guess civilian guns. I don't really know that too much, but I know for
Hunting
military,
rifles, hunting
in
rifles, you
some
still
places,
see
not
it.
many.
Um, and again, it's one of those things that's a little less utilitarian per se, and especially military rifles where now, especially well into the era of interchangeable parts, where it's like, okay, it's coming off an assembly line, and we've got to make it fit the average person. And so and it's also something else that takes more time. It also takes more material because now you have to have a wider piece of wood and then remove everything that's not that cheek piece. And kind of the difference, Ben and I, which again, you've seen Ben on the channel some, he and I have two totally different theory, or different ways we've learned to shoot. As far as modern stuff goes, I'm more of a rifle shooter. He's more of a shotgun shooter. So, and it kind of follows over to this. I like more of a cheek piece. I like a little bit different styling of the stock than he does, and he likes a little bit flatter there, a little more cast off, so it fits more like a shotgun does, and which you also see on these fowling pieces because it's a little bit different style of shooting a shotgun versus shooting a rifle.
Here's a question that hopefully it doesn't take you too off guard. What range, since we've kind of been talking about like point and area targets, what have you seen for accuracy on point targets for rifles? And were the Jaeger rifles the same as the American long rifle? Were they more
A
accurate? Were they less accurate? Were
a
they
Jaeger rifle with good powder and a good marksman and a good American rifle with a good American marksman, roughly equivalent. Point targets, I've taken one of mine that's built in this manner out to 300 yards on a 20-inch wide silhouette. Uh, once you figure out your holdovers there, then it goes back to that being a method of like going, okay, I need to estimate the range, and there's a lot more into range estimation in these than there is in modern pieces because due to velocity. Um, so a good rifleman about 300 yards. I saw something there pop up about Virginia riflemen and rifle
yeah,
companies.
my bad. I should have. All right. Well, I was gonna like I should have let you finish your point, but
Um,
there is a question I need to throw on that somebody asked at the beginning.
but so, and this is one I've actually done a little bit of looking into lately because we were talking about the first line at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse because it talks about the militia, the North Carolina militia taking off and running, but you also start to read the accounts of the British side where it's like, oh, well, first there was a sporadic fire, then there was a little more fire, and then there was a devastating volley, which is where Colonel Webster, says, "Come on, my brave Fusiliers," talking to the 23rd Regiment of Foot. And from the other side, you see that there are riflemen on the flanks. And I like the way to put this because you notice I said a good rifleman. So you'll see riflemen, you'll see people with rifled guns, and okay, whoops, computer went to sleep there for a second. So you'll see riflemen, men with rifled guns, and then everybody else. So it talks about the rifleman opening up at ranges of 200 yards and picking targets. Um, Men with rifled guns a little bit shorter than that, 100, 150 yards, and then that last volley, they're waiting to 40 yards. You're waiting till to a point you have to try to miss as opposed to trying to hit. So
There's
with somebody competent 200 in excess of 200 yards, the problem is finding a shot that long here in the South, especially, which is kind of where I more deal with.
there's also an account from a gentleman who had his pension. He says that one of the guys in his unit, a rifleman, shot a redcoat and he waited till he came to 50 yards. So just showing you the just the what. But then again, like, does he actually know 50 yards? People misjudge distances to this day. It's such a hard thing to do, but it's always interesting to get the yardage. I'll throw up this question here. For those that are listening and not watching, it says, I was wondering about the procurement process for American rifle companies during the war. For instance, I know Virginia had rifle companies with each regiment. Yes, that's correct. I think Virginia is the. Does North Carolina have rifle companies organic to the regiment as well?
They have
Sometimes.
some of them have some. Sometimes it's
Okay.
not a one-to-one thing, but there are rifle companies that don't get sent out to be with like Morgans and stuff. They're kept internal to the North Carolina Brigade. So as far as it goes, part of it with procurement process for rifles is going to be you show up with a rifle that you've had before the war, or you had a Smith build it. Um, just relatively recently, last year, they did the 250th anniversary of the Beeline March from Virginia, the start of it going up to join the siege of Boston. And one of the things that did take a little bit of time was waiting for people to get guns finished. So these are all coming out of areas where there is a rifle building tradition, and they are of course, like I said, they're bringing their own or they're having guns made that get finished up and taken up, and that's how they end up with these rifle companies. And not all of them are great shots. It's I was actually talking to the guy who's the new site director out at Fort Dobbs, which is a wonderful site here in Statesville, North Carolina, to come check out. But his doctoral work was on on American riflemen in the American Revolution, and it's one thing to come out and to be able to hunt and to do some trick shooting for people and to put on these airs of these backwoodsmen coming out and they stop outside of town, they paint themselves, and then once they get up there, there are some of them that can genuinely shoot, and then there's some of them that just make bad soldiers, to the point that the Continental Army and the riflemen up there are kind of at each other's throats a lot of the times because the riflemen don't have to engage in regular siege duty. They don't have to stand guard. They basically get to drink, play cards, and shoot at the people in the red coats. So that draws a
Specialist.
lot of sort of in a way, which that ultimately changes as the war goes on. But ultimately, they're having smiths build them. And at the start, yes, like the comment here, yes, they're providing their own weapon at the start. And then as it goes on, honestly, I don't know a lot about procurement. You do see some getting transitioned over to being musket armed. Um, Sorry, I keep seeing the same comment flash back up here. Um, you do see them transition over to being musket armed. Some of them, others, a lot of it's still their own guns. I mean, Congress is having enough time arming its own men with muskets, much less rifles.
And to the best of my knowledge, I've never seen any documentation of any sort of standardized military rifle made for the Continental Army. It's always, they're procured by the individual, they bring that to the unit, they leave with that piece. That gun is their gun, they come and leave with it.
And
I've never,
I would like to take a look into it further one of these days. And I'm actually going to reach out to a couple people that know more than I do about that one. Is I want to see if there's something like the commutation system that you see in the Civil War for clothing, where they're like, okay, my rifle broke, I need to replace it, and they do that, they pay for it, and then they get reimbursed, which is something that you see for clothing early in the Civil War, especially from the side of the South, um, needing to basically build an army from the ground up and uniform them in a hurry. They go by the cottage industry that's there, which is what a lot of this effectively is cottage industry.
I've also heard reference that when you show, if you would actually be paid more or compensated if you showed up to the formation with your own Firelock. And this turns into a problem because people will show up with their hunting fowler and then they'll leave with the military French musket. So they start stamping. That's where your United States starts getting stamped that, hey, this is government property. You can't just take this from here. But at the beginning of the war, remember, it's the whole government's new. Everything is new. We're trying to throw this together. So if we can keep costs down by you show up with your personal firearm, yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Like you're doing us a favor. So
Well, and the origins of the Continental Army up north with their militia laws, and down here in North Carolina, their starting base, they're pulling from the militia. So to show up to a militia muster and not be fined, you have to show up with a serviceable firelock, and that continues throughout the war. So they're I don't know about being paid more, especially here in North Carolina. I don't know. I don't ever remember seeing that as a particular thing, but it's more of you are required, especially at the start, to show up with a gun because that's the requirements you've had for militia service since you've been 16 under militia law.
yep. And I was told that I didn't read that, so that's my take that for what it is. I want to talk about the fusil real quick, and then we'll do the. That's not in the outline, Andy. Sorry. And then
All good.
we'll do. I think this is one of the last more unique firearms that is talked about. Oh, I have too many pictures. And then we're kind of going to jump back here and look at an officer's fusil, and that is this. So, um, because you hear fusiliers, fusiliers is a regiment in the British Army. It's also what the French call their infantry. I'm pretty sure fusil just means firearm.
Pretty
Let's
much.
do a
It
quick.
means gun.
It means gun. Okay. Yeah, but a
Um,
fusil in this context is a what? And who would carry a fusil?
so fusil, fusee, as you see, like the French. Um, it's a lighter, it's a lighter caliber gun as opposed to the military musket. And especially over here in the during the Revolution, you see a lot of them being carried by officers that now back to those American riflemen go, instead of, the original when they show up, there's like, okay, we have this pole arm that denotes us as an officer. Everybody can see that we're an officer, and now that's going, hmm, I need a gun that doesn't make me look necessarily like an officer, but one that I can carry around when my primary duty is not shooting. So you get a lot smaller bore. Still weird to say a smaller bore is a 62 caliber, or smaller, and they're slighter built. They look more like civilian guns, especially for the British in the war. They look more like civilian guns, and there's something to be carried for somebody who may need a firearm but doesn't always need a firearm, if that makes sense. Now, as far as the Seventh Regiment of Foot, the Royal Fusiliers, their original standing up was they were armed with fusees and they were guarding artillery. But by the time of the American Revolution, they were line infantry as other regiments. A lot of those specializations like that, until the rifles come back, had kind of gone by the wayside. It's more of an honorific title in a way than anything. It's like, now in the British Army, some of their armor, I believe, is still called the yeomanry, and that's a cavalry term, and they're riding in tanks and armored personnel carriers and stuff now. So that's kind of why they're called the Fusiliers. But by the time of the American Revolution, they're standard infantry. If that answers kind of your question about both the fusee and the who carried them in the English context, and why you do see some regiments called the Fusiliers.
It's awesome. I have a question. There's a British memoir written by a enlisted man, and I'm pretty sure he references taking aim and he kills a patriot with a fusil. I can't remember if he's 23rd Regiment or 33rd. I don't know if you ever heard it. I don't want to distract you too much on that, but
Fusiliers over here is going to be you calls
23rd, right?
the 7th or the 23rd. Let me look up 33rd Regiment of Foot because I don't think they're a Fusilier regiment.
And I think it's yeah, I don't think it's 33rd. It's interesting
Uh,
because I also think this happens during the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. So there's just
yeah,
lots
which
of
would be
great,
the 23rd probably.
yeah.
But yeah, so the 7th are the Royal Fusiliers, and the 23rd are the Royal Welch Fusiliers. For we keep throwing these references around, like to the numbers of the regiments, and then the 33rd was the West Riding Regiment in 1782. They didn't really have a name before that, and then later on they become the Duke of Wellington's regiment in eight, right after the Duke of Wellington dies in 1852.
Well, I won't hold us up on this. I'll see if I can find this name another time. But it's a great, great mention. Talks about taking aim, taking another man's life. Uh, so that is, we've wrapped up kind of an introduction of the different main types of firelocks. We didn't get into cavalry carbines. Maybe we can come back for a part two of this. We're almost at 2 hours anyways. So it seems like we'll have plenty to come back and do another build off of this. We'll talk about carbines and all sorts of stuff like that. But moving on in our outline, do you want you good on time, Andy? I don't want to
Oh yeah,
hold you too long.
I ain't got
Okay.
no pills to take.
We got 12 people here, so we got 11 now. The commander's perspective. So you are a commanding officer of a militia regiment. How do you handle the logistics of caliber when your men show up with 7 different types of firelocks? And as you've seen, we've only kind of covered the variations of the military and the civilian and all that, but we had to take in mind that almost they're all the caliber range is wide ranging. So how do you account for that as the commander of a regiment?
So the short form is you don't. You're not issuing. You're not going. Oh well, I need to have 42 and 45 and 40 and 50 and so on and so forth caliber round ball in stock. These guys, they already hunt, they already shoot, they already have to make their own round ball in order to function normally. So they're coming with the mold and the basic equipment they need to make their own ammunition. So North Carolina militia law, you're showing up with a pound of powder and a pound of shot, the size to the bore of your gun. So that's round ball. So you're showing up with that. After that, you're supposed to be issued from by the state. Supposed to be does a lot of lifting in that sentence. If it actually happens, well, North Carolina up until right before right about the 1840s, they earned that nickname, the Rip Van Winkle State, for good reason. They're not a very prosperous colony in the 18th century, especially when you move out west. So they are supposed to be issued lead and powder after that. And we don't have the granulations of powder nowadays like we did then. You don't have, 1F, 2F, 3F, so on and so forth. You have gunpowder and then you have maybe like cannon powder. So they're issued powder and lead, and then they sit around the fire and they make their own round ball using a ladle and mold or whatever they're using to make it. So that's kind of how you get around that, unlike a military musket where okay, all of the bores should be about this size, and we have standardized on this size ball, so we can just go ahead and ship them paper cartridges. And then later in the war, you see some, still, of course, having to make their own ball, but they're being issued effectively paper blank cartridges with standardized charges in them for them. So that way, they're not having to load from the horn quite as often. They're not having to load from the horn and a powder measure like they're doing earlier in the war, where there's not this standardized supply chain for a rifleman. It's you get the raw materials and then it becomes arts and crafts.
Okay,
So
and then the cartridge problem. Which of these guns could actually use a standard issued cartridge, and who had to use the powder horn?
so at the start, anything non-standard, uh, there are some, especially up in New England, and if you're carrying a smoothbore in North Carolina, it does provide that you can show up with 12 cartridges. So if you're in a more of a military setting, and especially using a smoothbore, showing up with paper cartridges is a lot easier of a way to do it than trying to load from a powder horn. So you see New England, a lot of them with cartridge boxes, and that's their militia equipment. Like you have the drawing here, the painting here. So they are showing up with either these committee on safety muskets or their own guns that they're making these cartridges for. And then the rifles, it doesn't really come to adopt that until later when you start effectively issuing blank cartridges, which you even see that with units like the rifles. You see some of them being issued powder and ball, and I think I've already referenced it. I don't remember, but the Stutzjäger in the Napoleonic Wars from the Austrian side, they have pre-measured cartridges, and then they also have. So yeah, what I said there on that comment, they get issued lead, so they get issued ingots, sheets, whatever they can find that's made out of lead. and
And for the
they're
listening audience, sorry, for the listening audience, one of the questions, did they get issued ingots of lead to make their own ammo? And yeah, he said yes.
yeah. But so the answer is ultimately yes, because you don't run down to George Washington's Outdoor World and go, hey, I need a box of 54 caliber round ball, like you can go down to Bass Pro nowadays or whatever sporting goods store you desire to frequent with your business. Um, so yeah, they're issued ingots of lead and they have to effectively make their own, which is an interesting thing to both the rifleman and militia, because you have to add in this extra step as opposed to once you start getting more uniform arms, be they French or be they British muskets. Now you can have central manufactories making these cartridges and shipping them out by the crate, and you can just roll up and go, "Hey, here's a handful." They're not actually having to spend that time making their own.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Springfield Arsenal at the time is rolling hundreds of thousands of cartridges, and we have lots of references of the Army is receiving hundreds of thousands of cartridges. So it sounds like from what I've been kind of my reading and my research is that a lot of the cartridge rolling is done at a factory level called I think what's it called again? It's called I can't remember the name, but basically it's done at the factory and brought down. I'm not saying that they don't roll their own cartridges at the unit level, but it is being brought in. And here's I got a couple questions. I'll read you the questions and then you can answer them. The picture we're
Certainly.
looking at, by the way, is by Don Troiani, and it's from the National Park Service. And according to AI, it is not in the public domain because it belongs to the U.S. government. But this photo is from the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, or this painting, and you can see just the variety of uniforms, the variety in accoutrements. Modern day, you'd call that your gear. And then I think that one of the cooler parts of this photo, or that sticks out to me, is that the man in charge is he looks like a Continental officer. Maybe he's an NCO, and he's a Continental guy. Who I've heard recently Ben was talking about a lot of the North Carolina guys that were fighting at Guilford Courthouse that actually served in the Continental Army. They moved back home and now they're in the militia. So maybe this could be that guy, but just kind of showing this late war combination of militia and gear, and now imagine all the different firelocks that they're going to be holding.
And I mean, the other possibility is that these are the Virginia militia, the second line, because Virginia is a especially compared to North Carolina, is a very wealthy colony. So by this point in time of the war, you start to see not necessarily Virginia Continental Line, but it's like Virginia state troops that have some issuing, and also a little bit of artistic license with the military gear here, that you start to see. Everybody's got the same buff strap, they've got the same box, all of that stuff.
Which would be less likely from,
Correct.
yeah. All
And
right, so our first, go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
I was going to start asking some of these questions that we have. Um, were they supplying their first up here from Hardy Hat 4972? Were they supplying their own wads and ball? Feeding so many handmade rifled must have been a quartermaster's nightmare. We've already answered the ball question, but for wads, that's a good one.
So with rifle, you're not really using a wad, you're using a patch. So yeah, they're supplying their own patches, and a lot of that's going to be like a ticking fabric. It's going to be kind of a fairly like a mid-weight fabric, and you would prefer them to be pre-cut. So you carry some in your shooting bag that are going to be pre-cut, and then in an emergency, you can take the strip, lay it over, and cut it with a knife. Um, so yeah, they are supplying. At the end of the day, they're supplying their own patches, if not necessarily the patch material. So they're cutting them if they're using any kind of grease with them. They're doing that. And I mean, a lot of it, what you do, the easiest way to shoot a flintlock rifle with patches is take, while you're doing everything else, stick the patch in your mouth, and it's just the lubrication is spit. And so yeah, trying to, like we said, they're trying to have every size of every feasible size of round ball that you would need to furnish even one company's worth of riflemen would be next to an impossibility outside of modern manufacturing and the modern scale of supply chain.
And then to kind of build off of that, we our second question. What was the advantage of having a standardized weapon, especially with the volunteer force from a disorganized militia? We've been answering this in and about. There there's a great book about supplying Washington's army, and there's a passage in there that George Washington orders units to exchange firelocks of the same caliber. He's like, if you have nothing but if you're half your guys have English muskets and half your guys have French muskets, and the regiment next to you is vice versa, just everybody get English muskets in this regiment, everybody get French muskets in this regiment, and that would be the period correct term on how they refer to these. They don't refer to them as Charlevilles or Brown Besses. They just call them English or the King's musket or a French musket. But if you want to build off that as well.
So, kind of like you said there, having standardized weapons, you have really the same problems that you see throughout war when everybody tries to start changing calibers in the middle of a shooting war. Looking at you, U.S. Army, and your new 6.8, hot rod cartridge. Um, Having a standardized caliber going, okay, well, this regiment has all British muskets. Now that manufactory that's making these cartridges, instead of having to try to make and guess for 100 different possible bore sizes or more, now you've got two. So you can have one line over here. Line A is making cartridges for English muskets. Line B over here is making cartridges for French muskets. So it allows you to streamline your supply chain. And now also, you're not having to have individuals sitting around making their own round ball and rolling their own cartridges at unit level, or even further than unit level, personal level, so you can further streamline, and that's more time saved to do other duties or to ultimately relax, I guess, would be another thing to do. So you're saving time, you're streamlining your process, and you're better able to efficiently use the material at hand when you're talking about a governmental sized organization.
Okay. And the word I was looking for was laboratory. Springfield was a laboratory. That's where they would roll the cartridges. Uh, Here's a great question for shooters or for people. No, hopefully you two you don't hit me on that. Would their standard quote unquote gunpowder be equivalent to our modern 1F? For those that don't
So
quite, well, for those that don't quite know, like modern black powder is 1F, 2F, 3F, 4F. The higher in the number, the smaller the grain. So 1F is called cannon powder, 4F is for like pistols. So it's different ignition.
4F 4F's priming powder usually because it's
Oh,
it's
priming powder.
almost
Okay.
dust. Um,
But based off of the idea that the higher you go up, the more volatile, the faster ignition, right? Or am I getting this?
no, you're
I
right because
okay, okay.
black powder burns from the outside in. So the smaller the grains per unit of measure, the more surface area you have, so the quicker it burns. So like you don't want to try to put 4F in a rifle; it will generate, shall we say, obscene chamber pressures. Um, so standard gunpowder, it's going to be kind of a mixed bag. Um, Stuff we see a little bit later is roughly equivalent to like Swiss powder. They're 1.5F. So kind of like a 1.5 to a 2F powder is what you're going to be seeing, to my understanding, based on the little bit of original powder and original cartridges that have been able to be examined. The other thing is going to be the powder nowadays that we're using is going to be more efficient because they've got the recipe dialed in, and you've got the economy of scale and the ability to properly measure everything out. So one thing you'll see if you read is wanting German double glazed powder. That's gonna the closest thing we have now is that, like I said, that Swiss one and a half. and that's going to be roughly equivalent. Then you get to American powder, it might be like a Go X 2 F, where it's going to be a little bit dirtier powder. But it's going to be less consistent than even that. So in a cartridge, you might have everything from what we would now term a 1F to a 3F to an extent.
Okay, and our next question is, was grease carried to load rifles?
It depends on the context. Grease you're actually going to use more in cleaning it than anything, because one of the easiest ways to, like I said, lubricate your patches is going to be stick it in your mouth. You would see some if especially if you're going hunting, or you would have like a certain number of like pre-greased patches, and then later on you see, I think Rob from British Muzzleloaders just did a bit about this with the Brunswick rifle. That's a later cap lock, but so yeah, you would have a certain number if you had like a particular thing you wanted to use, but the field expedient ones, stick it in your mouth is the easiest way to grease it. So, in short, sort of is the answer, but you would also use that grease for other things. You would use it effectively like an oil now.
And then Hari said that 4F can be used for very small pistols, 32 and under. How
If,
was powder shipped? And well, I guess, sorry, I'll let you respond to that.
so yeah, effectively you're right there. Most of the pistols that I shoot are like Ketlin trade pistols that are like still in that 62 to 65 range. So most everything I shoot's larger bore, but even then you can see there it's roughly equivalent to the difference now in modern rifle powder and modern pistol powder. If you try to load a rifle round with, say, Magnum pistol powder, you're gonna have a bad time.
Okay. How was powder shipped and distributed? I would assume in kegs, but did they just use a scoop and fill their horns right out of a big keg? In Infantry in Battle, the author who I've tried to get on the stream, who I need to reach out again to, he mentions that during the War of Polish Succession, there's a fight, and they actually did roll out big kegs of powder, and men were going over and grabbing it. From my understanding, in the 18th century, during this time frame, they would package the pre-rolled paper cartridges inside kegs, and then that would be sent to the unit from the laboratory. I haven't really heard any references to kegs of powder and men running up in the Revolution. I don't know. Have you ever heard anything about that?
So as far as being like issued in the middle of a battle, no. As far as getting powder issued, yeah, there's no other choice but getting casks of powder brought in, because you can't have those cartridges from the laboratories. So yeah, from what I understand, yes, casks of powder are what you see. Now, when you're in your home place, one thing you see is like what we call a family horn, where it might be able to hold 4 or 5 or 6 pounds of powder. It's going to be a large piece of cow horn, a large piece of horn that's this big around at the end and this long, be able to hold a few pounds of powder. But also with these rifles, you're shooting 60 to 70 grains of powder, and a larger bore fowling piece, you may be shooting 90 or 100 grains. Still, you're out of a pound of powder you're going to get with a rifle, maybe 90 to 100 shots. And then if you have something like exceedingly large bore, you're still going to get 60 to 70 out of it.
Yep, about what, 7,000 grains per pound of powder? I
Something
think
like
that's
that.
something like that.
Man, don't make
The
me do math today.
of all the people who do math, it's not me. And then Hardy says, hopefully nobody wears or has a pipe lit. Interesting enough, there was these. I got a picture of it here real quick. These tin cases that were started to show up in 1777 as a way of for like sergeants, corporals to hold more extra rounds, and then you could distribute it to the men as needed.
Yeah, so
And
that's a cool thing, and it's one thing you'll see some of us doing. It's kind of a reenactorism with the militia. Is like I'm walking around as an officer. I'm still carrying a shot bag with me with some rounds in it for people, and also most of my tools. So I'm more operating, that way if somebody, loses a flint or breaks a flint in the middle of a fight, I can run over and, I've got the tools that we need to do quick remedial action drills, which on a flintlock are a lot harder than doing it on an M16. Um, but yeah, so this allows, like you said, there sergeants to kind of come and top everybody off that have paper cartridges. And that's also, like I mentioned earlier, why you start to see kind of toward the end of the war blank charges effective being issued to the riflemen. So you have kind of a weird halfway solution. So you have the cartridges, the ability to issue the powder out in these tubes, and you're still having to use your own round ball.
to kind of build off of that, I sent a link in the chat. The Equipment of the Soldiers During the American Revolution by National Park Service. He actually, they're in an order of April of 1779, issued in Boston, says you are hereby ordered and directed to complete yourself with arms and accoutrements by the 12th. Therefore, you are liable to fine. You'll be fined if you can't. So, what you need to bring with you to, you know, formation: a good firearm with a steel or iron ramrod. Notice, not wood, and a spring to retain the same. A worm, a priming wire, and brush, and a bayonet fixed to your gun, a scabbard, a belt, and it continues, and all the different types of tools. Two powder horns. Whereas it gets into, it's a great article. Check it out. But they talk about the round shot, the buckshot, and I did the math on it. It is like 110 grains, 107 ish, because it goes on drams of powder.
Hmm.
So I use that as a rough estimate for when I shoot my cartridges. I get some commentary like, "Hey, you're not shooting high enough powder," which I might not be because it's hard to judge, right? Like shooting a 2F versus 1F. But yeah, it's a whole fascinating topic, and what could happen up in New England might be a little different than compared to North Carolina. Uh, Andy, so I think we have. If anyone has any questions, throw them down. We have one more here. Actually, Andy, we'll start closing out here. Um, if you were going to take one firelock, you have to choose to go to march to Kings Mountain tomorrow. Patrick Ferguson, the creator of the Ferguson rifle, will be there. See how that turns out for him. What would you take?
So, kind of the answer I wrote out here is um, it's going to be something, style. It's going to be something very common to me and to my era or area. Since you said Firelock, a Kalashnikov's off the table. Um, but it's going to be something I'm comfortable with. So I'm going to take. I've got it's a Germanic styled rifle based off of a Moravian gun. So something that would be made in the style of the Smiths up in Salem. Yeah, kind of like this one here. And it's something I'm comfortable with. It's something I've shot. It's a piece that I know well, and I'm in a hurry. I can function that without having to stop and go, okay, well, I have to consciously think about every step. I can throw it on autopilot, load, and fire the thing. So it's a Germanic style rifle. It's about a 44-inch barrel, 42-inch barrel, and mine's a 50. So basically, it's going to be the rifle I've taken out in the woods, the rifle I've had a lot of time with, and I'm very confident with being able to best equip myself in an assault on the hill, because at that point in day, the better chance that I have of dropping the man in front of me, the better chance I have of riding home at the end of the day myself.
Awesome.
So that's kind of it as a Germanic um Germanic rifle, kind of like you see on the screen here. That's going to be the style that's native to this part of North Carolina. So that's going to be what I carry as somebody who wants to carry a rifle.
And they're absolutely beautiful. And Malcolm says, did they turn down people for not showing up with that nonsense, or did they supply volunteers with requirements? But depending on where you're at, situation dictates. But in Virginia, for example, if you didn't have a firelock, they levied a county tax to provide a
Hmm.
firelock, and then they would stamp that. If somebody stole the firelock from you, they would actually pay triple the amount of the gun if you helped turn that person in. There's a way firearms are integral to the militia. So there is obviously points at the beginning of the war where they're lacking firelocks, but the Marine Corps is lack or the Continental Marines are lacking firelocks before they load the ships. You know, like there is a lack of them, and but more or less that's the beginning. As the war gets up and going, the French import 110,000 guns, the Dutch bring in, the Spanish bring in. But yeah, if you want to talk,
Well, and
I'm only talking about military. You can talk about
well,
rifles.
and even then, those guns that they're initially showing up with that are a lot of times mandated by local militia laws, there's going to be attrition as those get into the field. These civilian guns are going to get broken. Um, and then there's going to be some that's like, okay, well, the gun I have, I don't need to hunt a lot. Say I'm a tradesperson in Williamsburg for y'all, or I'm a shopkeeper in Salisbury. I'm not hunting, so the gun I have might be some thrown together hunk of junk that I can go out and do drill with, and that suffices for me. And then you join up with, say, one of these North Carolina Continental regiments or a Virginia Continental regiment, and on the march up, this thing breaks because it's a piece, and so now you are down a gun. But under the militia law in North Carolina, you weren't issued one, but you were fined if you did not show up to if you showed up to a militia muster without a firelock, without a bladed weapon. Whatever. Each one has a certain penalty levied against it. So yes, these guys by and large were showing up with them in some form or fashion.
Yeah, and we kind of build off of that. It almost ends where we began the live stream, which is talking about wood, right? We started off talking about Stockton cherry, Stockton maple, and if you think to bring this to the logical conclusion, these firelocks, the wood is going, and but the metal pieces are still fine, and you can mix and match. And I've read accounts that they would have barrels at the Philadelphia factory, and they would just put parts of a lock in here, barrel bands in here. You know, they would have the whole gun separated, and then they would just locally produce the wood, you know, maple, walnut, cherry, and then they'd file them down through contractors and reassemble the guns. And that's before we established the national armories in the 1790s. That's how guns are being made, and these are the guns that we see most commonly on the collecting market. These are the American assembled gun, like we've looked at earlier with the French parts, the American assembled gun with Stockton. I find this beautiful for being Stockton maple, but yeah, that's my little tangent.
Yeah, that pretty much covers it there. Is as these guns break, even through just that through use, it's not enough to have one gun for everybody in your army. Well, if you're actually going to be using it day in, day out, ultimately year in and year out, these things are going to get broken. And well, now that one gun per man, well, now you've got a shortage of guns, especially after the first time you lose a battle. Now you've got prisoners and you exchange a prisoner back. Well, he doesn't come back with a gun. They don't go, oh yeah, you're being exchanged. Here's your gun back. No, they go, get lost, and I don't want to see you again, kind of deal. So, well, congratulations, now you've lost gun. If it's like Battle of Paoli, if you get rolled up at night, you're running into the woods. You may be running into the woods with your pants and your shirt, and that's about it. And you see that some in some of the guys like Simon Kenton and this tales of like Simon Kenton and Daniel Boone and all of these guys that are fighting out on the frontier over the Appalachian Mountains, out in Kentucky and places like that. So there's
Absolutely.
always going to need to be a replacement for it.
It's war of attrition. I'll leave you. This will. Let's use this as the last one. We've gone far enough, so this will be our last question from Malcolm. Was reload time more important than accuracy at this time? And I'll let Andy you answer that, and then I'll do the closeout.
It depends on what context. Like pretty much every answer I've given tonight, it depends on the context. If you're in a military pattern, yes, yeah, suppressive fire is not a new thing. So you still need to be able to put more lead down range to make them have to either stop to keep at arm's length or to start to soften them up to the point where you can win the day with the piece that's used to win the day, which is the bayonet, and push them off the field. If you're hunting or if you're, shooting a rifle, accuracy is going to be more important at the end of the day because number one, you don't have a bayonet, and number two, you have a slower piece to reload, or number three, you're attempting to feed yourself and feed your family. So, in a military context, open field battle, yes, weight of fire and that ability to quickly reload and be accurate enough is going to outweigh, the pinpoint accuracy a rifleman provides. But the pinpoint accuracy a rifleman provides is going to be great if you're doing things like light infantry work, or if you're going out to harass pickets and things like that, which you see in the Virginia campaign in 1781. So ultimately, you have to have the two working together, and it kind of forms a rudimentary version of combined arms tactics between riflemen, bayonet armed infantry, um, and artillery in this era. So in short,
And,
yes, but also no.
and then just to add a little bit on that, like you were saying, the bayonet with the British, that was like British tactics to close with and destroy with the bayonet. They had realized that, like if because they're most on the attacking throughout the war in general, and they're showing up and fighting these Americans and pushing them off the ground, and they don't want to. The British High Command is very they don't want to have a lot of casualties, right? So they're trying to keep the casualties low, and the way you stay away from higher casualties is be very aggressive, switch to the bayonet, and yeah, that was just my little two takes. So Andy, if you want to do the shout out, anything else you want to cover, and then you can shout out Lincoln County Militia and why people should join. If you guys are going to Camden, I'll fall in with you guys this year. I don't know if you are though.
Yeah, that's the plan. We're planning to go to Camden this year, hoping to field a good solid cadre. So to kind of plug the Lincoln County Militia, our goal is to, as best we can, portray the militia of specifically Lincoln County, but more generally Western North Carolina, from from the road, kind of from the Yadkin to the Catawba River, and a little bit west of the Catawba in the specifically the Southern Campaign, because that's a lot of the events down here. The Southern Campaign, 1780 and 81. Um, and we do branch off to do other things like we did Morse Creek. But our goals here are, there are a lot of great units in the South, and more standing up, that we kind of have our own cadre, and everybody has their own groups of people which they prefer. So we're a group of friends. We get together and we do events. We also put a focus on things like drill and material culture and skills, and the knowledge of said skills that you're going to have. Yeah, thank you here for showing some of the pictures of our unit here. So our goal was, like I said, to portray these men as accurately as possible, and also to work with other very high quality units here in the South to come together at some of these larger events to put out a larger force to to again provide a better picture than maybe we've been given over the past past 50 years to some extent. And that's part of it's no fault of the people before us, but a lot of it is we have access to better research now. So our goals are to do it right, to do it right, to do it safely, and to have some fun. So if anybody out there listening or that watches this video later is interested in the North and South Carolina area, feel free to reach out. We're the Lincoln County Militia, and we'd love to talk to you and love to have you out in the field sometime.
Yep, they're on Facebook as well. I'll link to that at the bottom. I guess one more question. What was the original powder charge and muzzle velocity for the Ferguson? Is there a standard issued paper cartridge, or was it loaded loose ball?
I am the wrong person to ask about that one. The powder charge, it was effectively a standard, but it's due to the size of the chamber. So I'm gonna take a crapshoot here and say it's probably about 90 grains. And as far as paper cartridges, I don't know. I know there is a lot of them being loaded from the horn. So yeah, that I hate that I don't have a good answer for you, but that's all I've got.
There's always so much to know. We'll come back and we'll do a second episode. There's been a lot of comments actually. So thank you to everyone that showed up today, left a comment. Thank you all the viewers. I guess I'll plug my own channel. If you like this kind of content, like, comment, subscribe, share with a friend. This happens every Sunday, or should I plan to have these every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern. I apologize. I didn't get this one off at 1800 Eastern as I should have. That's on me. I saw a comment earlier asking what time zone I'm on, so I'll work on that. Hopefully the audio is good. I've been having issues with the audio, so that's something I'm working on my own. Yeah, but thanks for your time, and yeah, you guys have a great rest of the night, and I'll end the
Ye-
stream.
Yes, sir.